I'm going to try and keep it under 20 minutes, and then I'll just post the video when we're done. Okay?
Okay.
Go ahead and leave your video and your mic on since it's just the two of us, and that way we won't have to do too much back and forthing.
Okay.
So here's our agenda. We're going to first talk about the grades for marking period 4. Then we're going to hit the factoring review, which is greatest common factors, sum and difference of cubes, difference of squares, using factor boxes, taking square roots, quadratics, the quadratic formula, and complex numbers. We're just going to touch on it. And then I'm going to talk about your 2 assignments, the Who Killed Mr. Factor homework and the quizzes. So without further ado, let me talk about grades. They do want us to count grades for this marking period. So if you're not doing your work, last class or last marking period, I didn't put zeros in because they asked us not to. The only one I put in was those who didn't test. But this time I will be putting zeros in because we have no other grades. It's not like we have 6 weeks of grades like we did last marking period. So unless they tell me differently, if there's no work being submitted, I'm going to put zeros in. If you fail the whole second semester, that's not just last quarter, but the whole semester, they want us to give you guys incompletes and give you a chance to recover that in summer school this year. I have no more details on how that's going to work. I just know there's talk about a summer session. And this 9 weeks, we are studying for the SOL because they plan to give everybody who is going to be back next year the test in the fall. Now, if you're a senior, I'm not sure how they're going to do that. Leanne Higgs told me something, but I haven't gotten any confirmation on that. So they do want us to take the SOL this fall. Okay, any questions? Okay, moving on. So for factoring, there's 3 major steps. Look for a GCF, a greatest common factor, first. And then if there's a shortcut after that, go ahead and take that shortcut, and we'll talk about whole shortcuts. But then if you don't have shortcuts you can take and there is no GCF, we're going to do a factor box or the quadratic formula. This is the quadratic formula, and it works for every quadratic, every single quadratic. And I'm going to post these notes so you don't have to write everything down, Shane. It's going to all be there for you. It'd be better if you just listen because I'm going to go really quickly through these, and then you'll have the whole slides to watch later. So for the quadratic formula, all 3 terms have to be on the same side of the equal sign. You can't have like the bx here and then the ax squared and the c here. Everything has to be on this side, and then set it equal to 0 before you choose what a, b, and c are. Okay. All right, so GCFs. The first thing you always want to do is make a quadratic smaller. So we know it's a quadratic because the highest power is 2. And I know that 3 goes into 9, 3, and 18. So my GCF is a 3. So you always write your GCF first, and then you divide each of these terms by the number 3. So 9x squared divided by 3 is 3x squared. 3x divided by 3 is 1x, and negative 18 divided by 3 is negative 6. So that's how you take out a GCF. Okay. And then remember, whatever your GCF is, that should go in the front of the parentheses. People tend to throw it away, but don't throw it away. Okay. And down here, even though you can only take 7 out of these 3 and 3 out of these, you could also take a W out of each of these. Notice there was no P in the last one or no X in the last one, so we couldn't say 3X or 7P. But because there's a W squared and a W, we can take a W out. So remember, the greatest common factor is everything you can take out, not just whatever you can. All right. So this is an actual SOL question, and I'm going to give you just a second to look at it. If it's a GCF question, what's the GCF for all 3 of these terms?
6x.
Okay, so 6x is one of these 3. It's B, C, or D. When you divide each of these by 6x, what do you get?
18, or no, 3x, 3 to the 3rd power. 2x to the 2nd power, and then 1.
Yep, the negative 1, correct. So it's got to be D. Well done. Okay, good job. All right, so then we're going to talk about the shortcuts. These are all of the shortcuts you are supposed to remember. The first one is the easiest. It's the difference of squares. You have a perfect square here and a perfect square here separated by a negative sign. There's only a difference of squares, not a sum of squares. So what happens is we take the square root of the first term and the square root of the second term, and whatever the square root of a squared is, you put that in the front of both parentheses. Whatever the square root of b squared is, you put that in the back. And because there's a minus, we have to have a minus and a plus sign, one of each. Okay. For a perfect square trinomial, you're still looking for perfect squares in the front and in the back. But now we have a middle term. So when I take the square root of this and this, I put them in these positions, square root of a squared here, square root of b squared here. And then whatever this middle sign is, I put that in between and say, well, they both have to have the same sign. Because if I multiplied this times this, I would get AB. And if I doubled it, I would get 2AB. And then same here. Square root of A squared, square root of B squared, minus sign, because A times negative B is negative AB, but if I multiplied that by 2, I'd get negative 2AB. Okay. And then for cubes, you take the cubed root. I don't know if I can do a little tiny 3 with my mouse. The cubed root of the first term and the cubed root of the last term. And those are your first set of parentheses numbers, an A and a B. And whatever the sign is, you put that in the middle. Now, all I need to do is look at these two to generate the next 3. I don't even need to look back here. I'm done with this. Once I've taken the cubed root of this and the cubed root of this and got these 2 numbers, then I can say the first term in the next set of parentheses is this squared. And the last term in the next set of parentheses is this squared. And then you multiply the 2 together for the middle, and you always use the opposite of whatever sign was here. So if this is a negative sign, you use a positive. If this was a positive sign, you use a negative. That's it. Okay. And then here are a quick difference of squares. So if you were taking the square root of x squared, you get x, and the square root of 4, you get 2. And because there's a negative, you have to have a plus and a minus in between. So x minus 2, x plus 2. And this would be a minus 5, a plus 5. This would be 4 minus 3m, 4 plus 3m. And this would be 10 minus 7y, 10 plus 7y. And this would be 11k minus 9 and 11k plus 9. Okay, those are the easy ones. You got them?
Yes.
Okay. And then these are the perfect square trinomials. So if I took the square root of 4x squared, I'd get 2x, and the square root of 9, I would get 3. And I have to look at that middle sign and say, that's the one that works for both of my factors. So it's going to be a 2x plus 3 quantity squared. Because 2x times 3 is 6x, and if I double that, I get 12x. So the second one, you want to tell me what you think this one is?
8x plus 1 or minus 1.
And don't forget the squared, because both of those count. And then this one, you want to take a guess at that?
5x plus 9 squared.
Excellent. And this one looks like it would work, but here's the problem. If I said square root of x squared, square root of 36, and said that's going to equal x minus 6 squared. But if I say x times negative 6, I get negative 6x. And when I double that, I get negative 12x, which is not the same. So that's why this one is not equal to. This one will not work. Okay. These are the cubes. So if you took the cubed root of the first term, you'd get A. The cubed root of the second term, you'd get B. And then you square this, put them in the front and the back. And then you multiply the 2 together and use the opposite sign. So let me just move my dialog box. So for this one, what's the cubed root of 27x cubed? Do you know that off the top of your head?
3. Wait. Yeah, 3.
Yeah, 3x. And what's the cubed root of y cubed?
Y.
And now that you know your A and your B, I wouldn't even look back up here. This part just confuses me after I get to this part. Square the 3 and the x. What would you get?
3. Would I square like the 3 separately?
The 3 and the x, right.
Okay, so 9x squared.
Yep. And then multiply the 2 together. What do you get?
3x times y.
Right, would be just 3xy. And which sign should I use if there was a plus here?
A minus.
And then square the y, and what do you get?
Y squared.
Yeah, there you go. That's it. That's your perfect cube. So I'm going to skip that one because that's just the difference of cubes. And I'm going to skip this one because it's more of the same. And I'm going to go to factor boxes. So what I'm doing is a factor box for number 2 down here. So I have 1x squared plus 14x plus 40. Remember, it's A, C, B, right? And so 1, the only multiples I know of 1 are 1 and 1. And 40, there's a bunch of them. It's 1 and 40, 2 and 20, 5 and 8, What do you want to use to get to 14? I need these two products to add up to 14.
5 and 8.
Okay, so 5 and 8, you're close. 1 times 5 is 5, and 1 times 8 is 8, but 5 plus 8 is 13, not 14.
Oh, okay. 40, 10 and 4.
10 and 4, good. So 1 times 10 is 10, and 1 times 4 is 4. 10 times 4 is 40. So that gives us everything we need, because 10 plus 4 is 14. So once you've done the check, you can say, okay, so my factors are 1x plus 4 and 1x plus 10, or just x plus 4 and x plus 10. Okay, so that was factor boxes. Keep those in mind, because we're going to need to do those for our homework today. I'm going to skip this one. And then I'm going to show you Desmos is another way of finding how to factor. So if I had this 6x squared plus 13x minus 5 and I graphed it, I would get a negative 0.25 and a positive 0.333. So if I set x equal to positive 333, I can make that a factor by bringing the positive 333 to this side and making it negative. So that's x minus 0.33. Well, you know 3's repeating is just 1/3. That should say 1/3, not 1/2. And x minus 1/3 equals 0. And then you slide the 3 in front of the x, but leave the 1 where it is. So you get 3x minus 1 is one factor. And then over here, if x equals negative 0.25, I move the negative 0.25 to this side, and it becomes positive 0.25. And then I change it to a fraction. 2.5 is, I'm saying 0.25, it's 2.5 is 5/2. And then I slide this 2 in front of the x, and I get 2x plus 5. So if my factors were 2x plus 5 and 3x minus 1, they would give me this quadratic, which would have zeros here and here. Okay, that's the second part of your homework today. So remember how to use Desmos. And all I did was go into Desmos. And I graphed 6x squared plus 13x minus 5.
So that's what they're going to give me. That
You're going to get this, and you need to find the two zeros and turn them into factors like I did up above. So I found the two zeros, and I turned them into factors. Once I got everything on this side, I put parentheses around it, and then I slid the bottom number in front. We'll do another one. I'll show you one later on. So I'm going to skip that. Don't forget that this discriminant of the quadratic formula is b squared minus 4ac, and it tells us how many solutions and what types they are. So all positive discriminants, like if this number came out to be a positive number, I would say I have 2 real solutions. If it comes out to be exactly 0, I'd say I have 1 real solution. And if it's anything less than 0, a negative number, I'd get 2 complex or imaginary solutions. So for instance, this is A, this is B, this is C. So if I did b squared minus 4ac, I would get 20 squared minus 4 times 2 times 50, which gives me 0. How many solutions should I expect if I get the number 0?
1.
1 real, right. And if I did b squared, that's 2 squared minus 4 times 3 times 9, I would get negative 104. How many should I get now?
2 real solutions.
It's negative.
Oh, 2 complex or imaginary.
Correct. And then if I got b squared here, it's negative 8 quantity squared, which is positive 64, minus 4 times 2 times 2. I get a positive 48, and that's 2 reals because it's a positive number. So remember the discriminant. Okay. And then if you want to solve by taking square roots, you can do that when there's no bx term. This is ax squared plus c. The constant has no x on it. So since I'm missing my bx term, here's what I did. I moved the 200 to this side, and I got a negative 200. I divided both sides by 2, and I got x squared equals negative 100. And then I took square roots. The square root of x squared is x, and the square root of negative 100 is 10i. And you always put a plus or minus in front. So you did the square root of the 100, and then you were left with a negative sign, and you turned that into imaginary. Do you remember? Okay. We're almost done here. Okay, so these are real SOL questions. What is the factored form of 9x squared minus 25? Which one of these would you say?
3x plus, well, yeah, minus 5 and 3x plus 5.
Correct. And then which one of these four things is true? The first, second, third, or fourth?
A or F.
Mm-hmm. And then if you were looking for the factors of 16x squared minus 1, which one of these would be one of the factors?
G.
G?
Yeah.
Correct. Because you'd take the square root of this and the square root of this, and you'd have 4x plus 1, 4x minus 1. So there you go right there. All right, I'm going to skip some of these, and I'm going to go straight to imaginaries. So the only thing I wanted to tell you about imaginaries, and I'm going to have to turn on my Cisco or WebEx, is that you can do them in the TI-84. So for this year only, they were going to use the TI-84s. I'm not sure what they're going to do about next year. Desmos might get imaginaries by then, but Desmos does not take care of imaginaries. So we had to use our TI-84s. Do you remember way back in chapter 4, I said the only thing that Desmos doesn't do is imaginary numbers?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think they're working on it. But for now, we can use the TI-84s. You first want to go to your mode and make sure that you're an A plus BI, and it looks like I am. And then you can just use the second decimal key to get that I. So if I were doing the first one, I would say 4 minus 2, and then second decimal to get that I, close that, and then 5 plus 9, second decimal I. And it does all the work for us.
Can I get that TI app because I don't have one, like I don't have the calculator?
Good question. I think you're going to have to go online and do, I don't have any imaginaries for your homework. So if you were doing anything else that I haven't given you imaginaries just because I know you didn't have these calculators, but there is an imaginary calculator online. I forget where it is, but I can post that link, but you won't need that today, I don't think. And then this is your assignment, the Who Killed Mr. Factor. You guys did this a long time ago. We had them posted up on the walls, and it was called Who Killed Mr. Quad. Well, this is the companion one, and this one's a little harder because here the equations have numbers in front of the x squared. So we used to have all ones in front of these when we did Who Killed Mr. Quad. So now we're going to do 10 factor boxes and 10 Desmoses. So there's 20 of them. If you look at the assignment, let me show you. There are 20 of these. Welcome back. Probably be quicker to not even do this. Okay. Let me just open up the other one. So there's 20 of these guys, and you're going to do 10 of them with a factor box and 10 of them with Desmos. And I'm going to let you choose which ones, but whichever ones you do with a factor box, you have to upload that work to Google Classroom because that's part of your homework. So you're going to eliminate the ones that you find answers to, like if the answer, well, let's do the answer to number 1. So if I were using a factor box for number 1, I would say 2 for my A, -9 for my C, and +3 for my B. So the multiples of 2 are 1 and 2. And the multiples of -9, I know I have to have a 3 and a -3, but I'm not sure which one to make negative. So let me try this one first. 1 times -3 is -3. 2 times +3 is 6. And if I add 6 to -3, I do get 3, so that checks. So this 1x plus 3 is a factor. And this 2x minus 3 is another factor. And you remember how you find the zeros? You set each factor equal to 0. So if I set x plus 3 equal to 0, what do I get for the answer?
-3.
-3. And if I set 2x minus 3 equal to 0, what do I get?
3 halves.
3 halves, right. So what I'm looking for is the solution in that answer key that has a -3 and a +3 halves. And if I look here, right there, -3 positive. So we know that the murder did not occur in the garden, okay? So I want 10 factor boxes. So I just did 10 for the first 10. And then I said you could use Desmos for the next. So I went straight to Desmos and just graphed this right there. And I got this number and this number. So I know 0.563 is not exact. It looks like it's rounded, but I know 1 is exact. So if I go to the list and say, which one has a 1 and a 0.563? Which one of these do you think is correct? So like that's a -1, so it can't be that one.
Would it be the seller?
Well, is -1/3 going to be 0.563?
No, the balcony.
The balcony, right. That one actually comes out to 0.5625, I think. So that one is also incorrect. So do you see what I did? I did one using factor box, and then I did the other using Desmos. And when you get to all 20 of these, you're going to come up with a who, what, and a where based on which one of these wheres is not checked, which one of these what's is not checked, and which one of these who's is not checked. So what you're going to do is go into your Google Classroom and click on the formative. And this formative link will actually take you to those 3 questions in the worksheet. You may have to do your work on a separate piece of paper, and then I want you to upload your factor boxes into Google. You don't have to show me all your Desmos work, okay? I trust that you know how to type it in Desmos, but definitely upload your factor boxes for me into Google, okay? And I believe that is all I have for you. Yep, that's the entire assignment. So everything is in Google Classroom. The link to the factoring game is here. And then there's an online quiz. I'm going to post the video that you and I just made together. And then there's an online quiz right here. Make sure you take only this quiz, no other quiz. Okay, after you've done the formative. And that's it.
Okay.
You got any other questions, or are we good?
I think I'm good.
Okay, if you find anything you need help on, don't forget to email me and I'll be happy to help you through the email.